Good evening, everyone. My name is Shawn Reese, and I'm the Chief Operations Officer for Wyoming Humanities. And welcome to tonight's Wyoming Connections conversation, where we're linking Wyomingites with big ideas. A little bit about Wyoming Humanities. We are one of the first state humanities councils in the nation, and since then 55 others have followed suit and created their own state humanities councils. But we were really formed with a partnership of rural associations such as the stock growers and wool growers and county extension offices, with purpose of introducing humanities to rural Wyoming. Our mission is to advance democracy through the humanities. And we do that in a number of ways. Certainly, fostering critical thinking and lifelong learning is a lot of what we do, as is community engagement, raising cultural awareness, bringing the arts and humanities into conversations about Wyoming's economy and well-being and discourse, and also promoting civics and democracy through conversations like tonight's. We have been working over the past year or so in putting together a reader on Wyoming, on democracy. And some of our most important partners in that endeavor are here tonight. Scott Henkel, representing the Wyoming Institute for Humanities Research, Jamie Markus with the Wyoming State Library. That reader, which is at the print shop right now and we'll be distributing it shortly, that reader covers such topics as diplomacy and courage and liberty, civility, protest. But as we think about constructing our democracy, we also need to think about our democratic institutions. And I think during this period of COVID, we have come to a new appreciation of many of those democratic institutions. And it's our responsibility to evaluate their durability and their purpose and strengthen it. So for instance, our school system or the postal system. But tonight we're going to talk about one of the premier institutions of our democracy, the public library. With that, I am very pleased to turn the conversation over to one of Wyoming Humanities board members, Isabel Zumel, and she is going to introduce our speakers and guide the conversation. And then I'll pop back on towards the very end of the discussion and wrap things up. So thank you for our guests tonight. Thank you in advance for this conversation. Thank you for our participants. And we look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Shawn. Welcome, everybody. I am thrilled to be here, and I'm really honored to be helping moderate and lead this discussion tonight. I feel like I am in a group with good friends and colleagues that I'm really pleased to have the honor of introducing. As Shawn had mentioned, we will be talking quite a bit about libraries. I'm mostly going to be wearing my moderator Wyoming Humanities board member hat, but occasionally I'll be jumping in. I was the former assistant director at Teton County Library in Jackson for 15 years, so I know that I won't be able to resist at some point jumping in. However, I want to make as much room as possible to our esteemed guests and panelists. And I will start with introducing first Jamie Markus. So we are thrilled that Jamie is with us. Jamie is basically the leader of our Wyoming library system in the state. He is the Wyoming State Librarian, has held that position since he was appointed in 2016. As State Librarian, Jamie is on the executive board of the Wyoming Library Association and serves as our primary leader and advocate for libraries across Wyoming. And this includes public libraries, academic libraries, and school libraries. In 2009, Jamie was designated a library journal mover and shaker. Just so you know, in the library world, that's a really big deal. It's kind of like when the Pulitzer or something. And then in 2014, Jamie was named a White House Champion of Change for promoting libraries as essential partners in community outreach activities. In other words, we are very, very fortunate in Wyoming to have a rock star librarian leading the way. Yay, Jamie.
Yes.
Next, I want to introduce Lisa Scroggins, who is also a library rock star here in the state of Wyoming. Lisa is the executive director of the Natrona County Library, a public library system with a main library in Casper and a branch library in Edgerton. Lisa is passionate about the critical role public libraries plays in building and fostering equity, equality, and democracy in all of our communities across the state. Lisa is also a graduate from Leadership Wyoming. Yay,
Well, true. I had to put a plug in. Never as fine as the class of 19. There'll be a lot of negative feedback about that. Everybody's class is the best.
Yeah. Well, you're joined with somebody from your class, correct? Our last speaker,
Dr. Henkel, yes.
Dr. Scott Henkel. So Scott is the director of the Wyoming Institute for Humanities Research and associate professor in the departments of English and African American and Diaspora Studies at the University of Wyoming. He is also the author of Direct Democracy, Collective Power, the Swarm, and the Literatures of the Americas, which won a 2017 CLR James Award for Best Published Book for Academic or General Audiences from the Working Class Studies Association. Scott is a fellow Wyoming Humanities board member with me. He is also a graduate of Leadership Wyoming, same class as Lisa. And I believe Shawn may have mentioned this, but he is also the editor of Democracy Under Construction, which is the reader that that our session tonight is named after. So welcome to everybody.
I feel like you're trying to sell that book to everybody.
Well, it's free. It's free. Anybody who wants
right,
to
it
get
is
free
free.
copy.
And for the record, in case I forget, we will have copies of that book sent out to every public library. We're also going to put them in every high school library as well. So this will be far and wide, and it's very exciting at this juncture to get this going.
Thank you for that. It's excellent.
Are you guys ready to jump in?
I think so.
Okay. So this is our last Wyoming Connections discussion before the November 3rd elections, which is just a few weeks away. And we felt it was really timely to reflect on the state of democracy. So we're going to start a little bit on a low point, and then we're going to bring it up to a high point. There was a really sobering February 2020 poll by the Pew Research Center that found that globally, people are more dissatisfied than satisfied with the way democracy is working in their country. Here in the United States, the dissatisfaction rate with democracy was 59% among survey respondents, so more than half of the folks that were surveyed. However, another Pew poll that was done in the same time period of earlier this year and was focused primarily on the United States, found that while the public is dissatisfied on the national level with democracy, so the electoral system and the US Congress, state and local governments continue to be viewed very positively. So, as beautifully imperfect and messy and at times fragile democracy can be, we want to start on a hopeful note. There is a local institution that exists in every single Wyoming county that quietly and unassumingly works to protect democracy every day. And that institution is?
The public library.
Yay, yes, exactly, the public library. So in the words of Andrew Carnegie, there is not such a cradle of democracy upon the earth as the free public library, this republic of letters where neither rank, office, nor wealth receives the slightest consideration. So we are going to be talking quite a bit today about public libraries and how public libraries play an integral role in democracy every day in each of our communities in Wyoming. So my first question to the panel, from your vantage point, how do you see libraries protecting democracy?
So we didn't talk about who was going to talk first, but I'm just going to jump in. Before I even address that, I just want to say, as a new Wyomingite, I've moved to this great state just under 5 years ago. One thing that I find incredible about Wyoming is the forethought of the leaders, in that you were able to say just a moment ago that there is one in every county. And what is that, right? So that legislatively, every county has a public library system or a public library is incredible. So that just shows me, like, at the very beginning and the very foundations, there was an understanding of the importance of having a public library. So how do we protect democracy? One of them is, I would argue that while we are certainly not the only public institution available to our communities, there are tons of them. I would argue that public libraries, without fail, serve the largest part of the community. We welcome everybody. It doesn't matter what your age is. It doesn't matter your social status. We welcome everybody in a public library equally and offer equal and equitable services, which are really two different things, right? And we embrace differences in thought. So public libraries are facilities that accept their role as facilitators of conversation, in which sometimes they're difficult conversations, in which multiple viewpoints can be held and shared. And I think that is really a cornerstone for public libraries, and something that is protected, and in some instances, in some communities, libraries have to fight for that. I feel very fortunate in Wyoming, and particularly in Casper in Natrona County. That is not a fight that I have to fight, which is great. It speaks to the community, but I will tell you, I would be ready to fight and to protect the patron's right to explore whatever they wanted to share their thoughts and opinions. And so I think that's one of the things we can do as public libraries to protect the tenet of democracy.
Jamie?
Well, whenever I think of democracy and public libraries or libraries in general, I always think about access to information, because I really think that we are the only place that you can go in a community where you can walk in the door and, without a subscription, and heck, without even a library card or even being a member of the community, sit down at a table, pull a book off a shelf, use a computer, and access a variety of resources to educate yourself, to learn something new, or to learn about a problem you're having. And in addition to maybe looking at a normal problem, we also carry books and resources on controversial topics. I mean, we're not afraid of showing both sides of an issue. And when you get stuck, you've got an educated staff whose sole purpose is to help you find answers. There's no one else, no other institution that does that, and does that all on tax-provided money. And here in Wyoming, we just have a great system, being county-based, and the way that we're funded is amazing. And if we get into that, I could go for an hour. But they're just nowhere. There is nowhere else. And in addition to just having the access to information, the fact that libraries are repositories of information is a slightly different turn of that coin. And in fact, the United States Congress knew that libraries were so important to the functioning of government that in 1813, they put together the Federal Depository Library Program. And this is a program that sends federal documents, so those publications that the feds put out, and it puts it in libraries across the United States. And the purpose behind it is so that everyone, no matter where you live, no matter your education, would have access to those documents that are running our wonderful nation here. There are 7 such depository libraries here in Wyoming, the state library being one of them. And each and every one of them is required to have trained librarians on staff, so that anybody who comes in and wants to know about federal information, they have someone they can talk to. And the other thing is, we aren't allowed to block off our stacks. We aren't allowed to limit access to that information in any way. And as COVID has come up, we've actually had to pay particular attention to that rule, because we had to stay open to the public. We allowing for masks or whatever local policies were put in place, but we couldn't keep that information away from the public. So between the access and just being repositories, there's no other place to be in a democracy to get what you need.
Scott, do you have anything to add with your University of Wyoming hat and academic libraries?
Yes, I should say clearly at the outset, I am not a librarian. So I defer on questions of libraries to my wonderful colleagues and friends. But oh my goodness, I can't say strongly enough how important libraries are to me personally, to the work that I do with the Humanities Institute. My library here at the University of Wyoming, a co-library, is actually about 900 yards from where I'm sitting at this very moment. And due to the pandemic, I haven't been inside the library since last April. I went in yesterday for the first time, and I was overwhelmed by the experience of missing it. How do libraries serve democracy? I mean, they serve like the little Scott Hinkle who as a kid went there and checked out books and discovered worlds that were far greater than the one that I had been given. It helped me to do things in life that I would not have been able to do without it. My story is not unique. Public libraries are where people go to seek out information. It's where people without jobs go to search for information on jobs. It's for people without homes to go and get a little bit of warmth on a cold day. Public libraries serve the public. And how profound is that? To have an institution in every little town around Wyoming that serves the public universally. It's rare and it's wonderful. And I can't express my admiration for our libraries and our librarians enough. Thank you for your work.
Just a little bit with my Teton County Library hat on, it's always been very interesting to me. We have a fairly large Latino community in Teton County. And when folks from other countries come to our library, they are astounded that they're able to check out as many books as they want or materials as they want for free. So I think there's something very unique about how libraries in the United States operate, and the freedoms that are made available for folks, limited, no limits, as lowering as many barriers as possible. The other thing I want to mention, and we're probably going to get into this a little bit more later, just the space that the library provides. How many of our public libraries serve as polling places? I know the library, Natrona County is the same, also our branch libraries. So there's probably a good chance if you haven't voted absentee or by mail, that you may be ending up going to your public library to do your voting this November.
It's also a place where a lot of people learn about their candidates. Because like, for example, one of the things we do in Natrona County is for years we've offered candidate forums. And so, it's nonpartisan. It's, no matter what side of the topic you're on, whatever your viewpoint is, it's a candidate's opportunity to get their information to the public so that we create an informed citizenry, right? So that when person goes to cast that vote, they're not doing so arbitrarily, but they're doing so purposefully, full of information of what that candidate stands for and how that aligns with them and helps them cast their vote intelligently. We've heard it said that knowledge is power. And as an institution that is research and connecting people with information, we help connect people with that power. We help them gain knowledge from literacy skills to database skills. So
we're not going to get through all the questions tonight. There's no way, because I want to back up on what Lisa said and just add to the fact that the public libraries in particular are seen as neutral. Everywhere you go, their meeting rooms are for everybody. They're a polling place on one day and they've got children's hopscotch the next day. And the next day they've got somebody who's borrowed the room, for a quilting bee or who knows what. But they are seen as neutral to everybody. And that's why they're such a great place to get information out about any sort of topic, whether it be a government push out, roll out. Maybe I would imagine that we'll have libraries potentially participating in some sort of vaccine rollout here in the next couple of months. And in fact, the Maine State Library did a survey, oh boy, it's about 3 years old now, that puts librarians second on the list of places that are seen as neutral, of places where you go to get information and you trust where that information, that the information you're given is absolutely trustworthy.
What was first? What was first?
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Oh, yeah.
Nurses. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. I'll go with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Probably a close second, though.
Okay, you guys ready for a little trivia? So I did a little quote from Andrew Carnegie at the very beginning. How many Carnegie libraries exist in Wyoming?
So is this trivia for the panelists or is this trivia for the?
Let's see what the panelists say first. Anybody?
Well, I know
Librarian.
the answer. Is it fair if we know the answer?
Shawn just asked 13.
Okay. Close, but no
It is
cigar.
actually 16. So 16 libraries. So if folks are in the chat, if folks are in the chat, if you can try and name off the libraries in the chat, all 16, I can't guarantee there's going to be a cool prize at the end, but if we get all 16, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that would be great.
And Isabel, there are still 5 of them that are operating as libraries today.
As libraries. Okay. I don't know that. Okay. If anybody knows what those 5 are, put them in the chat, and then you'll get us an autographed autographed copy of the Democracy Under Construction book from Scott.
Totally.
Okay, moving on. There's a very librarian tenet, and it's called intellectual freedom. So I'm going to turn this over to our star librarians to kind of explain what intellectual freedom means and how it relates to democracy.
Okay, I'm going to kick us off really quickly and just, so for a quick definition, intellectual freedom is an individual's right to be, their right or privilege to be able to read, research, explore, share, and from all points of view, any information without any restrictions that they want to. So that is, I mentioned earlier, that is a core value of public libraries. It is something that we will fight for, and it's actually in line, it's a core value of democracy as well. So, gosh, I don't want to repeat myself, but libraries actually often facilitate these discussions or these opportunities. So it could be a class that libraries are offering where people can come and learn a lot of different things and discuss things. You know, book talks and book discussions can bring multiple different viewpoints that are not controversial, but it's a sharing of ideas from different viewpoints. Candidate forums show different viewpoints that could be could be on the more controversial side, depending on how strong an issue is. But of course, then the right to be able to research anything that you want to research, that you find an individual finds value in one thing and somebody else doesn't. But that individual has a right to be able to research that topic. You can have a group gather at a library to discuss a controversial topic without judgment. And that's one of the things we didn't mention before, Jamie, but that whole right to be able to get together, to provide a place for people to gather, regardless of the topic, is really important. To say that it's also done without judgment. Basically, libraries are here to serve. We are a community service facility. We are here to serve the public in whatever way. And so library is often driven by what the public needs are. But intellectual freedom is the right to be able to explore and learn and share whatever you want to.
Right. Without fear of it being told to anybody else.
Yeah, no retribution. What you check out of the public library, that is your business and nobody else's. Confidentiality is key, but I'm gonna let Jamie address that because I think
Yeah, well, so 2 things. And first of all is something that this is a basic, intellectual freedom is a basic tenet of just librarianship. And it has been since 1930s when the American Library Association started putting together what it calls its Library Bill of Rights. And the Library Bill of Rights is really 7 different statements that are basically adopted by nearly every library in the United States that cover everything from intellectual freedom to who can use a meeting room and how open you should be to any of the public who come into the building. So it really forms the base level of librarianship. But the last one is all about a patron's right to privacy and confidentiality, either with what they're checking out or what they're looking up or the questions that they're asking. And here in Wyoming, we're in an interesting situation. As the state librarian, I happen to be the head of what's known as the Wild Network. This is a group of libraries across the state that includes every public library, that includes every community college library, a couple of special libraries like the state library and some school libraries. All in all, there are there are about 107 libraries in this network. And as state librarian, I sign all of their contracts. And that makes me what is known as the custodian of record for every patron transaction that it occurs at a public or community college library in Wyoming. That sounds like a lot and maybe some jargon there, but what it boils down to is it means that if a law enforcement officer or anyone wants to know what somebody has checked out of a library, the only person who can tell them is me, or the state librarian if it's not me. That is a huge responsibility and one I don't take lightly. And in fact, I have regular recurring dreams, they're darn near nightmares of what I'm going to say and what's going to happen when these people come in and ask for somebody's library records. But just so you know, that does not happen very often. And if it does, I have great people down at the Attorney General's office who will give me counsel and help me write a polite way to say, absolutely not, no. Absolutely. But so in addition to that being the case, we've set up our system in a way that we anonymize all patron data. The whole network, all 107 libraries, we keep the minimum amount of patron information we need to know that you have a book checked out, it's due here in 3 days, and if you return it ruined, we're going to charge you $37 or whatever it happens to be. But after about 2 months of you checking that out, we've anonymized it, we've scraped it, and there is no way, even if the FBI came in here with a bunch of IT technicians, that they're going to be able to find out that you just love the Jan Karen series of cozy mysteries. And that's exactly how we want it to be, and that's how we just keep things rolling that way to keep everything confidential.
That's one thing in library circles that we've learned, right, Jamie? The less information you keep, the less you have to fight to not share. And so I will say, when I moved here, as a new director in Wyoming, the state library does a great job of onboarding new Wyoming directors to let us know that as part of a consortia, it's a statewide consortia for our libraries, right? And so that's why Jamie is the custodian of records. And so I went through that training and it made sense up here, but it didn't like soak in deep. And I couldn't, because that's not the way it is everywhere else. It is so nice to not have to be the custodian of those records and to stay up at nights. When you said you stay up at night and have those nightmares, that's crossed my mind before. Like, what am I going to do if the sheriff comes in and gives me this subpoena? So in Texas, I would have to come up with the answer. And here I can just say, here's Jamie Markus's phone number, give him a call. So, but yeah, the less records we keep in a public library, the less we have to worry about defending. But that intellectual freedom, that Bill of Rights, the Library Bill of Rights, that is kind of those the basic tenets of what we do. And we say, it doesn't matter. We're not turning that over unless an attorney or a court tells us we have to. I'd be a court, not an attorney, but yeah.
And a little bit later, we'll get into a little bit about challenged and banned books, which is a very interesting topic. But before we get to that, I'm going to return for a second to the Pew Research Survey on democracy. And here's a quote. Americans generally agree on democratic ideals and values, but feel that we are falling short living up to these ideals. A new phenomenon that's contributing to this assessment is a lack of trust in each other's ability to make astute political choices. So 78% say that knowledgeable voters are very important in the United States, yet only 39% think that voters are knowledgeable about candidates and issues. About 2/3 think made-up news and altered videos create a great deal of confusion about the facts of what current issues are. And while Americans put a good deal of faith in our own ability to recognize inaccurate or misleading information, they are less sure about their neighbor's ability to do that. And so my question is, do you see a conflict between this tenet of intellectual freedom and then freedom of speech when it comes to misleading or false information? And how, as libraries, do we navigate this?
You want to tackle this one first, Jamie? Because I have some definite thoughts, but.
No, I think you should, because I have a totally different take on this. So I want to
Okay.
hear from you and maybe from Scott.
So first, I would say only two-thirds think that fake news is kind of getting us all off course. That kind of blows my mind. So I would think it would be like 3/3, which is all of us, or at least 7/8. But you know, I'm not a mathematician, so I don't want to go into the numbers part. But yeah, so you know, what to do about intellectual freedom and the right to be able to research and find your information, and how much of the information we're getting is fake. That is something that is a challenge. So as public libraries, or, you know, I keep saying public libraries because I'm a director of a public library, but this is really libraries in general, right? So part of it is an educational piece. It's to teach people how to discern the information, how to find reliable sources and knowing that they're getting accurate information, how to screen what you're looking on Facebook or social media to see, you know, what seems legit and what doesn't, and offering those courses to the community is a part of what we do, certainly. Being that reliable source of accurate information is super important, but that doesn't mean that we can fix the problem, you know, and that's so hard because, you know, when you know what is accurate and you see people saying what's not, it's like I want to stand up and go like, wait, you've got it wrong, you know. Even on my own personal Facebook, and I see friends sharing things that are, I just want to like say, did you click on that? Did you look at that source? Because I don't know if xyznews.com / whatever, that doesn't seem reliable. Have you ever heard of them before? It does present problems. It does present challenges. But all we can do is just consistently repeat the opportunity to educate. You know, I said a minute ago that knowledge is power, and it is. And so our role as public libraries or as librarians is to keep repeating the truth, connecting them with accurate, reliable resources for information, and not just spoon feeding, here's the right answer, but teaching, here's how you get to the right answer. That is really, here's how you find, here's how you vet a resource. Those are all important parts of it.
Scott, you want to add something? Then.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I find myself continually this evening in the situation of just wanting to repeat what Lisa and Jamie have just said, because it's so valuable. You know, Isabel, the question you asked, this is among the most important questions that all of us are facing at this moment, not just in the midst of election season, but in the midst of a pandemic where quality information is quite literally a question of life and death for many people. So this is a conversation that we should take very seriously. And I mean, among the things that I want to affirm of what Lisa said is like the antidote to bad information is better information, and like always sticking up for well-researched, well-documented, well-sourced information. I kind of think of like, I mean, because the root of the issue is that if you don't have good information, you can't make good judgments. The importance of that is obvious, I think. And the antidote is, of course, not censoring things, because once one goes down that path, it takes away people's right to think for themselves, which is like the cornerstone of the idea of a public library, also of public education, the right and the ability to think for oneself with good information. I mean, also a way to serve democracy. I have over there a collection of buttons and pins, and I think that the button and pin from the American Library Association from Banned Books Week like a few years ago, it had, like, you probably remember this, it had a picture of a robot on it with arms, and the tagline was, think for yourself and let others do the same. And I think that's just incredibly valuable. And I really do think that one of the issues with people who traffic in bad information and false news, and let's not deceive ourselves, there are people out there, and institutions out there who traffic in misinformation. And I think one of the reasons why that is objectionable intrinsically is because it takes away people's right to think for themselves, on the one hand. But with a little bit of critical thinking, it can also sharpen people's ability to think for themselves. Like once a person gets a little bit of practice in figuring out these sources of misinformation or the types of characteristics that generally come with misinformation, that's a very powerful thing. Like maybe one of the most powerful moments of like intellectual engagement and intellectual growth is when a person can say, wait a minute, that's not true. And they can back up their analysis with information that they learned from librarians and at the library. It's a beautiful thing.
Well, when you talked about people who traffic in these untruths or this fake news or misinformation, you know, have you ever had somebody say like, why do people post that stuff that is just so wrong? Why do they even do that? So I think, you know, it is a I don't know why, but my assumption is going to be, it does undermine democracy. It undermines the power to think or to, you know, we make judgment based on the information in front of us. And if we're not vetting that information, then our judgments then kind of take us down the wrong path, right? We see this right now in politics, but we see it in COVID. We see it in so many things. You know, it can be something as simple as, you know, what's the best dog, or, you know, just kind of crazy off the wall kind of stuff, right? But people aren't putting that out there just to see what happens. It's really not a social experiment. People do this and spend time to make information look legitimate when it's not, for a purpose, for a reason. And I would argue that for a lot of people, part of that reason, it does undermine democracy. Because if knowledge is power, false knowledge is like uncontrolled power.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. And not just, and yes to all of that. And to build onto it a little bit, I mean, they're the producers of this misinformation. But one thing that is incredibly valuable in this like path of learning how to think analytically, a lot of people will like, once they see that it's out there, it's produced, it's circulating, they will continue to share it and they will boost it, right? Maybe not always for nefarious or malicious reasons, but maybe one of the issues that we face as public educators and public librarians, sometimes people want to believe that things are true. I desperately want to believe that the pandemic will be over tomorrow. I desperately want to believe that, but my analytical thinking doesn't allow me to think it because it's not correct. But I totally understand how someone not out of any malicious intent will see content that someone else created and that other person has malicious intent, but they'll share it and continue to boost the signal of it, you know, because fundamentally people want to believe a different thing. And sometimes reality is a very hard thing to wrap one's mind around, unfortunately.
Well, I'm gonna jump off there, Scott, and tell you that there are, in addition to this being a huge problem, and it truly is, there are a number of tools that public libraries have at their disposal and things that they are doing to combat this very thing. With the advent of technology, there are services that some public libraries are putting on their computers so that when a less than reputable, say, news site pops up, there's a little warning up in the corner that says, hey, you may want to double check this before you believe it. I know that we've seen some of these new tags come on social media now, you know, unverified type information. And so libraries do have access to that. And so many of them are putting that in place in an effort to help educate, because we know full well that it'd be great if folks came to a library program and learned how to educate themselves or learn the tools. But in some cases, if you put it on their computer right in front of them, that it will assist. The other thing that really worries me sometimes is not just this online proliferation of incorrect information. It's when we get it in print form. And there's not a library in the world that doesn't receive at least one donated self-published book once a month that shows up on their doorstep that has some miracle cure or some long lost history of somebody's uncle. And some of those self-published items are outstanding. And some of them are not. A lot of them are not. And self-publishing books and you know, the growth in that industry is just taken off. And I would imagine that here next year, whenever we all get back to life as normal, I hope all these folks who've been stuck at home will have reams and reams and books that they are ready to publish. But our libraries have things called collection development policies that they've had actually for over 100 years, since the beginning of the library, that says what types of information they're going to collect, what views they're going to collect, not what views they're going to collect, but if they're going to collect something on this side of the spectrum, they're also going to collect on the other side of the spectrum. And that if they've never heard of the publisher, they're going to probably look for a review of that book before they put it on the shelf, because the last thing any library wants to do is take a beautiful looking book that's full of garbage and put it up on the shelf and make it feel like it is, you know, the truth.
Exactly.
I'm going to jump in here for just a second. I've got a comment from Eric Sandine, who wanted to do a shout out to the UW Library and public libraries as well for staying open and accessible in modified ways during the pandemic, and how much innovation that employees have had to come up with in order to be able to do that. So as one of the public libraries in my previous role that had to make those decisions, and Lisa, I know you and Kate and others are in those decision-making roles as well. Those are tough decisions to make, to really want to balance the safety and the health of the community, but also keep that open access, which is so fundamental to us. So thank you, Eric, for that comment. The other thing is that he acknowledged that Linda Wagner wrote a history of the Carnegie Libraries in Wyoming. And I believe Linda passed away recently. And so just a shout out to her for her work, her extraordinary work in really documenting that important history, not only for the Carnegie Libraries, but also libraries here in our state.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
Thank you for those. And by the way, for the folks who are tuning in, if you could use the Q&A, that's the place where we can actually see the different comments that are coming in. The last thing is that one of our attendees has named off 4 of our Carnegie Libraries: Lusk, Newcastle, Rock Springs, and Wheatland. All of those are correct. We've got 12 more to go, guys. So let's keep the thinking caps on, and we'll move on to kind of our next set of topics here. In many of our communities in Wyoming, public libraries serve as an important community center, and often in these very small communities, they are the community center. They are places to check out books and movies and periodicals, and places to access internet and Wi-Fi and computers and other types of devices. They're also sites for programs and community discussions, as Lisa had mentioned. And all of these offerings seem pretty straightforward on the surface. So my question to our librarians and to Scott: are there times or instances when providing books or technology or space for programs is difficult or even controversial?
You know, controversy is all around us, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Like every day, right? Controversy is just everywhere. Even when you are being purposeful in being neutral, in being that place for everybody to gather, for everybody to come in, controversy is just like knocking at your door all the time. And that happens for libraries as well. So yeah, sometimes the difficulty is in not what we do or what we don't do. Sometimes it's, you know, Jamie mentioned earlier about a collection. Sometimes the difficulty is in simply what we are offering. It is a very purposeful decision when you're working on a collection to make sure that you don't just offer materials on one side of an issue, that you offer materials not just on 2 sides of an issue, but on multiple, sometimes 5 or 6 or however many different sides there are. And doing that alone with the whole goal of being inclusive and offering all those multiple viewpoints, surprisingly enough, sometimes that's my biggest controversy. Because it's like, well, So I see you have this and I agree, but why on earth do you have this? And I know we're going to talk about banned books and challenges later on. And so I don't want to walk too far down that path at this point. But sometimes just what you offer causes a controversy. And then, of course, there's, we are, and as organizations, we are driven, we have our own policies. And so we have policies not only on collection development, which Jamie already mentioned, but we have policies on use of our space. And so one of our policies at Natrona County is that all of our events are free and open to everybody in the public. And so we might have an organization who wants to use our meeting space, but they are maybe you have to pay to go in. And then we say, well, you can't really do that here because everything here is free and open to the public. And that causes not necessarily a public controversy, but it causes maybe a controversial discussion with that entity saying, we don't want you selling your wares here. That's not what we're all about. Those are minor controversies. Those we face all the time, right? So, like I said, controversy is around us all the time. It's not going to be avoided. But one way to address it is just, head on with respect and showing that whatever your answer is. So if we say we do not allow people to sell or to charge somebody to come to an event at the library, you have to be able to tell them the whys. So why is important in so many areas? And in public libraries, a why is very important. Why do we show multiple sides? Why do we choose to carry materials on multiple sides and offering multiple viewpoints? Well, because we want to be equitable and we want to be non-judgmental, and we want to provide information across the table, across the whole span of the spectrum, so that everybody who's interested in that topic, no matter which side, has information that they can access. Why do we not allow organizations to charge if they want to use our meeting room and to do what they want to do if they're using the room? Because we want everything to be free. So no matter who comes in, whether it's the most affluent person in our community or the least affluent person in our community, we want to make sure that everybody has access to that program. So being able to answer why is one approach to handling controversy. But it's all around us. It's going to be, it doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah, I have a controversial space story from the Teton County Library. This was a hard one, and this was during the 2016 election season. Mm-hmm. And so candidate Senator Ted Cruz had asked if he could do an educational talk at our library. And this was a talk that was sponsored by the Tea Party. And I remember staff coming to, the library director and I, what do we do here? We made the tough decision to let it happen. And I think there were some folks, especially in our county government, who really questioned, why would you allow that? And really, when we were making our decision, what it came down to was making sure that the access to the rest of the space was going to be open, regardless of what was happening in our auditorium. And that was a tough one. I'm sure that other communities may have made a different decision, but we felt that to stay true to our policies and our tenets of open access and open information, we allowed that. Now, probably about 6 months after that, there was another group that came and asked us to use the library auditorium. And these were folks who were affiliated more with the Me Too movement. And again, it was another question, do we allow this in the library? And again, we said yes. Not to say that library staff weren't nervous in both of those situations, because we knew that the crowds were going to be large. We knew that we had capacity that we need to make sure that we stayed within, and we needed to make sure that the rest of the library wasn't obstructed. So not easy to make those decisions. Always being able to explain the why, as Lisa said, even if people aren't exactly happy with your answer, but being able to explain the why. Folks have disagreed, but they have respectfully disagreed, especially when it's very clear, obvious that we will, as much as we can, allow all viewpoints to be in our space. And that's a tough one for librarians, because all of us as staff have our own personal views. But when you walk into the library as a staff member, your job is to put those aside and make decisions based on what's open and equal access. And that's not easy. It's not easy. And these questions come up every day. Yeah.
All the time, right? Yeah. You know, you mentioned like when staff have their own personal views, and you're right. So everybody who works, everybody has their own personal views. But so one of the things that's really important in public libraries is, like, while I'm at work, while the staff is at the library, nobody should know their views, whether it's on, no matter what the topic is, whether it's political or non-political. You know, basically the only view they should know about is like, how's the weather? It's great. You can have that view.
Or it's terrible. The weather's terrible.
Or it's terrible.
Wyoming.
That's right. Or it's changing in a few minutes because it is Wyoming. But to be able to set that aside, I think that takes a special skill, a special person to be able to do that. And that is an expectation that everybody should have of their library staff. When they walk into a public library, they should not know, based on that librarian or that library staff's behavior, their viewpoints on anything at any given time.
So I'd like to add for our audience here who may not know this, but public libraries are actually run by library boards who are appointed by their county commissioners. And there are either 3 or 5 library board members. This is set up in state statute, and in fact was set up in the original state statute in 1871. And it is the library board who actually write the policy for the library. Now that policy has to go through public policy and public records and rules, laws, and so it has to be out for 90 days and get comment, and they have to do it in a public forum. But it's that policy that dictates what happens in Lisa's library. It's the policy that dictates what may happen here at my local Laramie County Library, and the differences between the two. And it is the board who makes that decision based on the local situation in their community. And that's why Lisa may not allow a for-profit entity to use one of her rooms, whereas other library systems do. But they may expect a $100 fee or some other kickback or some notice saying that, you know, that the library is not responsible for what's said in this room. But it really is that library board that operates for the public, on behalf of the public, to write the policy for the community. And it is being consistent to that policy, whether it's for a meeting room issue, or whether it's through your collection development and what kind of books or materials you have on the shelf. It's if you're being the same and treating every person or every group who wants to use that room the same, then you are absolutely doing your job.
It's super important too, to articulate the principle behind it. Sometimes there's a conversation about platforming, like, to whom do you give your microphone? And I would not be happy with a scenario in which a librarian got to choose the yes to this person, no to that person, no to that person. But it can seem on the surface that when some controversial group or whoever comes and speaks in a public place, it can seem as if the library is offering a platform to that person and therefore endorses their views. But of course, it's important to articulate the principle behind it. We serve everyone, not any particular person. And just because they have our space from time to time, doesn't mean we agree with what they have to say.
I have a really important question from an audience member, and it is actually Maggie Murdoch, who is a patron at Natrona County Library.
Oh, hi.
What is the public funding for county libraries? I know that additional funding is sought and hopefully obtained. The general question is, what is the fiscal state of our libraries and how do we maintain it in the future?
So she's talking libraries as a whole. That needs to go to Jamie. Yes.
Yeah.
Here's the great thing. One sheet of paper has all of our public libraries budgets for this year on it. So that is one thing that the state library is required to capture by statute is some sort of fiscal report from our public libraries. And I can tell you that for fiscal year 21, this next year, our public libraries are in pretty good shape. They have not lost a ton of overall, they have not lost a ton in terms of funding at the moment, with some pretty big exceptions. Fremont County Libraries lost somewhere in the neighborhood of 17% to their funding. Now, what I'm hearing from our library directors is that this year is bad, or is not going to be bad, but that's because our counties are falling back on some reserve funds. But it is next year, and depending on the Craig report that comes out on Monday, and the Joint Appropriations Committee that starts meeting next week, and what Governor Gordon and how this all moves forward with the state budget, and what they do in Congress in terms of additional CARES fund for the state and/or support for local cities, towns, and counties, that will really dictate where we go in the future.
And so so in Wyoming, libraries, public libraries are funded from your county commissioners. And there is no rule that says this is how it needs to be done and this is how, at what level it needs to be done. So some libraries may be operating under a mill and some may be operating under an appropriation. So in Natrona County, the Board of County Commissioners annually make an appropriation to the library. So we don't have a set mill. We get, it's part of the county budget whenever they are working out their budget. And it's also important to remember that this year, I think the reason a lot of libraries, and of course there are the anomalies, but I think the reason that a lot of the public libraries were kind of okay for this year, for fiscal year 21, is because the county budgets operate a year behind. And so it's going to hit. We already know we're living right now through a time when we know that the economy has definitely taken a hard hit. Both, you know, it's like a double-sided punch, right? So it's like you've got COVID on one side and oil and gas and extraction on the other side. So it's like bam, bam, and it will hit the counties. And how counties can look at their next year's fiscal budgets without looking at cuts at all their departments, you know, I don't know. Every county is in their own unique situation, but we're holding our own for this year and preparing for what next year holds. So that's what you do, you know, in your budget. You try to make sure that you're accounting for difficulties that are coming down the road.
I do want to add to what Lisa said and go back to the beginning where we talked a bit about the Wyoming library community and the fact that we all are on a shared network and that we do share resources statewide. If you've only lived in Wyoming and you have not visited a public library in another state, I urge you to do so the next time you're out of state because you're going to get a radically different experience. Yeah. All of our libraries are connected. Our ebooks are shared between anybody who has a Wyoming library card. You can take your Wyoming library card from your public library and go to a community college, anyone in the state. You can go to any other public library in the state and they will check out an item to you, or 5 items or 10 items, because we share all the way around. You can't do that in other states, generally speaking. And so as these economic factors hit Riverton, and as they hit Fremont County and Jackson and Natrona County, all differently, the underpinning, the library infrastructure that ties us all together is something that we will all support in the way that we can. So while I am not excited about where we're all going to go here in the future, and it's not a rosy outlook, I do believe that our libraries have the capacity and the ability to manage what's coming, at least for a little bit anyway.
God?
We have another comment from Maggie. Can we go to that one too? Because I was maybe tangentially involved in that situation.
You're going to have to help me with the other comment, Scott. Go for it.
Maggie Murdoch writes, public service like that provided by public libraries takes integrity and courage. Mm-hmm. A shout out to the Campbell County Library in Gillette. Several years ago, they didn't hesitate to host a UW Saturday University discussion on women in Islamic countries, even when the library was threatened by physical violence by a few opposed to any learning about Islam. We were so proud to be associated with that library, and the library's meeting room was packed. I had moved to Wyoming a few months before that incident happened. It was one of the very first public things that I learned about the state of Wyoming outside of my little town of Laramie, to which I had just moved. And as you can imagine, it caused quite a stir. And I'm super proud of the Saturday University program and the Campbell County Library in Gillette for like getting right back up on the horse and having a Saturday University program in the months later. And I was part of the group of faculty that went up to Gillette for that next Saturday University program. And I will just say, it came off without a hitch. There was no hullabaloo like there was on the first one, for which I was grateful, frankly. I didn't want to get in a hullabaloo. But it does take courage to talk about these things. And I also want to add my applause for those librarians up in Gillette, because it was great.
I'm just going to add one more thing in terms of that, going back for a second to that question about funding. I think if you as private citizens see the value of your library, please let your elected officials know that. I think as we have to make very difficult decisions, not only in the state level, but on local levels and county budgets and town budgets and all of those local budgets, what's going to rise to the top are the things that you feel are important and where you want your money to go to. And so if there is support for public library, please let your elected officials know. Please reach out to your library boards, your library friends boards, your library foundation boards, and let them know. I am sure they will find a role for you to help you advocate on behalf of the libraries. And I hope one thing that we can take away from this discussion, a lot of things, but one thing is really just how important these institutions are to all of us and democracy. We're talking a lot about public libraries, but I would say that is the case for academic and school libraries as well. Having sat on the legislative committee for Wyoming Library Association, it was sometimes a fight to be able to keep those school libraries open because they're not necessarily viewed as instruction that is of utmost importance. But when I think about going out into the world, what are the skills and the thinking, the thought process that we want our young people to go out with, because they are our future voters. So whatever you can do to support your local librarians in all of the library realms, please step up and do that. So yes, okay, it's trivia time again. And I'm gonna put Dr. Henkel on the spot. Okay, ready? Okay. Oh. One of your areas of research and expertise is free speech and censorship, and you teach a course at the University of Wyoming called Banned Books and Stories Not Told.
That's true.
In libraries and communities, books are regularly challenged. Basically, they're questioned about the suitability of being in a collection, or they're banned, which means they're pulled out of the collection altogether and not available to the public. Okay, which of the following books have not been challenged or banned in the United States? Ready?
Ready.
Okay. Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. Everybody loves that book. To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee.
My all-time favorite.
The American Heritage Dictionary. Really? Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare.
Just trash, I'm just saying.
The Holy Bible. And of course, to follow up with the Holy Bible, Captain Underpants and the Sensational Saga of Sir Stinks-a-Lot by Dave Pilkey. Okay, so which one of these has not been challenged or banned?
Well, I know for sure that Captain Underpants has, because my memory is that that's one of the most frequently banned books like these days.
Yep.
Yeah. One of the most challenged books is the Captain Underpants book, and that radical book about,
Although I would say bathroom humor is highly popular with young kids. I'm just saying.
Yeah, totally. Totally, that's
right. It's that particular series, kind of like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, is like, it saves parents who have reluctant readers. It's the reason why kids want to read.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, but it's also pretty sensitive, right? And, for a parent who might not want to have such a conversation, right? Maybe keep that out of the kids' hands, and that's like the reason behind that book's banning all the time. I do know the answer to the question, and maybe I can like drag my toes, and if there are people out there who also want to try to answer the question, they could maybe type in if they know it. Jamie has very strong comments against Shakespeare.
Look, I have a 13-year-old daughter, so Romeo and Juliet not happening in my house.
Oh, right, right. Well, there's a thing. You know, Juliet, I mean, like the love story, Juliet was 14. That's pretty young. And maybe one reason why parents, again, want to ban Romeo and Juliet, because they don't like to think of 14-year-old kids, you know, stabbing themselves at the end.
Among other things.
Among other things. Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. Isabel, I believe the answer is they've all been banned,
Exactly.
including the dictionary. Why anyone would want to ban the dictionary, that's I don't know. But the other ones, you know, pretty.
Well, if you flip to page so-and-so, it's got this word, you know, so.
Exactly.
Oh,
Get rid of it.
All the
So
four-letter
all of them
words,
have-
Scott.
all those 4 and 5 and
All of
6-letter words, yeah.
I'm going to tell you why the American Heritage Dictionary was banned. So this is the reason. And it's not just the American Heritage Dictionary. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary has also been banned in various libraries and schools. In 1987, the Anchorage, Alaska School Board banned the American Heritage Dictionary for its objectionable entries, particularly slang words including bed, knocker, and balls.
nice.
Yeah.
Shame on them.
Yeah. Amazing.
Oh,
However, you will find all those books
you will.
on the shelves of your local public library.
Amazing.
Yeah. So when I was kind of taking a look at all of these books that have been banned or challenged, a common thread is that they all appear to have a conflict between sort of the themes in the book and community values in their localities. In your roles as librarians and professors, how have you balanced kind of this tension between what local values are and banning books? And why is it important for us to balance that tension?
So I've been the director here in Natrona County for just under 5 years. We have only had 2 instances where we've had materials challenged. And so there's a process by our policies that are set by our Board of Trustees for which a person can challenge what's on our shelves. And then it's called for us, it's called a request for reconsideration. They request that we reconsider whether that belongs on our shelves or not. One of those was for an item that we found it was appropriate to be on our shelves, but was not appropriate to be in the part of the collection that we had it in. We had it in, it was really in too young of an audience collection. Although in a public library, anybody can go anywhere they want to. You can have somebody that's in the 3rd grade checking out in the adult reference department. You know, there's no age limit. Your card doesn't get you to floor number 1 only. So you can go anywhere and check out anything without restriction, as long as it's something that circulates. So we, of course, have items that don't circulate, part of our Wyoming collection that is rare or hard to find or hard to replace, but it doesn't limit access, right? But we did have something identified in the juvenile collection, which really belonged in our adult collection, just because of content, but that doesn't mean those kids can't go and check it out. So based on that request for reconsideration, we changed where it lived in the library. Another request for reconsideration was just recently. Somebody asked that we reconsider one of our periodicals. So, you know, that's like magazines and newspapers, right? They did not find value in one of the newspaper subscriptions that we had and wanted it canceled because they said basically it's like a blog. It's not actual news, which we'll go back to our fake news conversation from before. However, it is an item that members of our community find value in, and they use it, and they use it on a regular basis. And so whether the patron finds value in it, or whether I find value in it, or whether Jamie Markus, the guru of all that is Wyoming libraries, whether he finds value, if it is something that meets the needs of our community and they're using it, then it stays. So we really haven't in Natrona County since I've been here been faced with too many challenges, and so balancing the needs of our community. You know, we have a collection development team that that we use our policies, and when somebody challenges, we go back to our policies. Did we vet the item through all of our policies, which is basically, you know, did we use reviews, community needs, you know, there's a whole list of things. Fortunately, it's not something that's been challenged a lot in Natrona County. And before I came here, the library I was in Texas, same thing. We didn't face a lot of challenges. And I think that speaks a lot to having a broad collection with multiple viewpoints of as many topics as you can. And when you
UW story that I think is particularly instructive, it also happened before I arrived. So probably others in the audience will know more about the details. But a pretty profound thing about like how free speech and censorship work is that censorship often ends up backfiring in particularly spectacular ways. When Huck Finn was banned, Mark Twain said something like, "Great, that'll sell another 50,000 copies."
Yeah.
Before I arrived at UW, I think just in the few years that I arrived at UW, Bill Ayers, who was a member of the Students for Democratic Society and the Weather Underground that many people thought was a terrorist group, was scheduled to come and give his talk at the University of Wyoming. And he was stopped from giving that speech. And people, you know, sometimes look at censorship from a simplistic view and say, "Oh, that's horrible. Why would anyone want to do that?" Well, the University of Wyoming president was getting death threats because of this scheduled speech. And when people's lives are on the line, it becomes a very tricky thing. But many people viewed Bill Ayers' political views as antithetical to Wyoming's political views, whatever those were. And that's the reason why he was stopped from speaking here. But it was a University of Wyoming student who filed a lawsuit, a student, a veteran actually, who said, "The University of Wyoming is infringing on my rights to free speech to hear Bill Ayers talk. I might not agree with him, but I want to hear him." And probably, you know, one can't really tell, but probably had Bill Ayers come without the controversy, he might have, I mean, I put on a lot of events around the university. He might have had 50 people in a room. But because of the challenge, when he eventually came, they had to put him in a huge auditorium that was packed with, I don't know how many people, but like a lot more than he would have received had the challenge not been there. So I would say to anyone who has like potentially censorious impulses out there, it's going to fail on you. So you might as well just protect free speech when you see it.
I'm going to jump in with a question that actually dovetails very nicely, Scott, and this is a question actually that was related to a point that you had made earlier. What role does the library or any public institution have in preserving opportunity for democratic discussion and dialogue? We've just kind of talked a bit about that. Increasingly, it is harder and harder to present virtually any topic without some perception of political bias or leaning. Has the current climate made it harder or less safe for institutions to host truly democratic discussions? And what is the impact to our institutions, staff, and volunteers of that reality if it is changed?
Yeah, it has changed, of course. And it's a super important thing to think about. There is a vitriol and there is a vigor to our current public discussions. And you know, we don't necessarily get anywhere by denying that it doesn't exist. The better path is probably to figure out why it does exist. Like speaking in incivil ways. First of all, I think what many people will find is that it also backfires on them. People are taken less seriously when they speak in such ways. But really, I want to try to be empathetic in this moment. And we also live right now in the midst of a pandemic. We live in the midst of protests for racial justice. We have hunger and poverty and a lack of healthcare in the United States. And all these are material things that make people very unsettled. So like in conversations about like the vitriol of public speech, there's at least two levels that I hope we always look at. Like, I hope we look at the speech itself and try to like add better speech to the offensive speech rather than censor it. But also, you know, one might want to pay attention to how people live, what people's lives are like, and what puts them in a situation where they act in these ways. Oftentimes, people's feeling of real material insecurity, like in civil speech, is like the canary in the coal mine to try to figure out the other things that people are dealing with. And I think those are two important levels of the conversation.
Yeah. We have a comment from Eric Sandine. UW has a long history of flirting with censorship. Very complex and worthy of study. I don't know if those are marching orders for you, Scott, but there you are.
I believe they are, and Eric, I accept your challenge.
Yeah. Scott, so I am going to have you close us out, and I want you to like leave us with wisdom and dazzle us. Okay. So we have been talking, oh, raise the book, put it up. We've been talking about democracy under construction, and as the editor, I'd love for you to dazzle us and close out our discussion this evening with a little bit from the book.
I'm actually going to like follow Lisa's lead. Lisa, you had a thing in here that we chatted about a little bit beforehand. You wanna tee it up, please?
Yes. So I haven't had a chance to read the whole book. I did some skimming, but I paid particular attention to Dr. Hinkle's interpretation of democracy in the foreword. So he says, and I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see this. Democracy helps us all feel our value and why we are important, and helps us understand where we've come from and where we might be going. And so to that, Scott, I took that as democracy is a journey. And in relation to our conversation today on that journey, I would say your librarians are a guide. But I loved that democracy helps us feel our value and why we are important.
Yeah. I believe it deeply, and thank you for pointing it out.
Yeah, I love that.
You know, maybe Isabel, I'll just like read the passage that Lisa points us to, and then I'll say like the book is free. Like if you want a copy of the book, just let us know, and we're happy to like mail it directly to you. Jamie, thank you for all of your work. The book will be in all of Wyoming's libraries. It'll be in the public libraries, it'll be in the academic libraries, school libraries, and thank you, Jamie, for all of your work in setting that up. You know, maybe I'll just like read a little bit, and then that'll be that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Go for it.
This is the introduction to the book. I want you to think about a big idea. It's this: you can shape your community, your nation, and the world in which you live. In a democracy, the people have power, and that means if you're a person, you have some power. The exciting and also hard part about this is that everyone can be part of the democratic process. Our democracy hasn't always lived up to that ideal, but if that process is working well, we have to figure out ways to make our communities thrive together. That's a challenge, but it's one part of what it means to live in a democracy. Another part of what democracy means is that it's always changing. And then, you know, to the point that Lisa raised, democracy helps us feel our value and why we are important, and helps us to understand better where we've come from and where we might be going. There is a power, a democratic power that is part of every one of us when we think in creative and critical ways. Let me repeat that. The power to think creatively and critically is in every single one of us. It's not something that only a few special people possess. We have the potential to think, to act, and to do so in a way that helps our communities be vibrant. And yes, Lisa, in that journey, public libraries are the guides.
Fantastic. I can't wait to get my hands on that book, Scott. I'm looking forward to it. Can I just be a real reading nerd right now and just say in Harry Potter's The Chamber of Secrets, Ron Weasley was visiting with Harry, and he was channeling Hermione as he said, you know, Harry, when in doubt, go to the library.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us and for the really robust set of questions and comments. This has been fun.
Thank you.
It has been fun. Thank you for including me. It was great.
Yes, and I'd like to thank all of you as well. When my wife was teaching my children the importance of libraries and the role of libraries in the communities, she often talked about when she lived in Laramie and the library moved from the Carnegie Library to a new building down the street, there was a bucket brigade, and she was part of that bucket brigade, passing book by book. But as we've heard tonight, the libraries are more than just the buildings. They are boards. They are a community across the state. Especially it's the librarians and the patrons. And I very much appreciate talking about the role of the librarians. And if we think about the Pew study that Isabel's mentioned a few times about people's faith in democracy and our waning commitment to democratic institutions, I hope tonight's conversation will be impetus for us all to show the support that Isabel suggests that we share with our elected officials. Part of the way that you can show your support is sharing this Wyoming Connections on our Facebook. It will also be posted on our YouTube channel within about a week. But please share this and get people engaged and reinvigorated about this most important democratic institution. Isabel, Jamie, Lisa, Scott, thank you all so much for sharing these, your experiences and your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.